Hi, I'm Mr. Miyagi, and this is Mr. Miyagi's Workshop. Well, today we're going to finish up this old shovel, hopefully. We're going to get the pistons and rings on, cylinders mounted, hopefully the heads, and get the push rods and push rod tubes in place. And then maybe even put the charging system together. We'll see how it all goes. So let's get to it. Okay, well, one way to help make this thing a little bit stabler is I made up this bracket. It bolts into these areas around the case. Doesn't really matter where. Also has these two tightenings that can tighten down onto the splines on the crankshaft. So what I've done is I've set this thing up and we'll put in a bolt. You don't need to crank this down hard. It's just something to hold everything in place and keeps the crank from moving. So it's just a simple little thing. This one I made up out of just a piece of pipe and some bolts and some flat stock. And it works great. It does not want to move. So we can get putting the pistons and everything on here. So let's get to it. One of the most fun I've ever had was putting these dang spiral wrist pin clips in. You have to take your time, get them down in the groove. It's a lot of just kind of pressuring it in place, making sure that you don't scar anything. These just kind of rotate around in there and they fit right into that little inside groove, and you just keep working them around until they pop in. Now a little lubricant on that really helps to help slide that in, and you always want to double check that those have clipped in all the way. That looks good. Piston feels good and everything. Now we're going to put some rings on. Now I've already done the front cylinder. I did a kind of a fast forward on that, but doing these rings, like the first, which would be the number 3 ring set up, this oil sweeper, there's a little break in the, and you want that at the front edge facing forward. Now I will show a detailed description on which way these go. The bottom one that holds this in place, the split needs to be at roughly 2 o'clock. You just work that down on there, be very careful. So there's your break over there. Now, the top one needs to be roughly at 10 o'clock. Secondary compression ring goes on. Now I've looked on these and sometimes there's an indication which way they should go up. These really don't have an indication on it, but secondary ring is split over here. It'd be roughly around 4 o'clock. And you very carefully spread these because you don't want to snap them. You just kind of walk them down on there. I've seen guys try to force these on and all they do is get themselves into trouble. So there's our second split at 4 o'clock. And then the final compression ring on top. And that doesn't really have anything. So we're going to put it over here, and that's more like at 8 o'clock. So what you're having is 12 o'clock, you have 2 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 8 o'clock. That's probably an easier way to remember it, but like I said, I'll do a photo capture of what I've got to go by. So now putting these cylinders on, Now these cylinders have already been fitted, and I've wiped them out once, and I'll wipe it out again, and I'll put it down here. And what I like to do is kind of figure out what my layout is here. So when this goes on as such. So this is basically the facing forward. And you can, you can just mark these and go, okay, that's forward. What I also like to do is I like to spray a little WD down in there and on the rings. And that just helps break those rings in a little better. Now you can use a ring compressor or such. Myself, I've done enough of these that I can get it down. If you grab the brake on the top ring, and this is where you can break rings very easily. You got to work it on there, and it'll slide down. And then you get number 2 over here. Just got to play with them a little bit. And if you can get the split part of the ring to go first, everything else seems to slide a little easier. Try not to turn the cylinder when you're doing this, because you're going to get your ring alignment out. So that's down on there. Get this side on, and then you just very carefully tap that on there, and it should slide right down. Get the rag out of the way. Now, one of the things that you want to remember, you have some head bolts here, and a couple of places like here, you can't get this head bolt in unless you've put the head bolt in first. You have to check to make sure that these will slide in. There we go. But you have these 2 right here because they're right over top of a stud. There's no way to get those in there. That's something to keep in mind. It's a bit of a pain when you've got that all tightened down and you realize you've got to put your head bolts in and you can't get to them. We have these special washers here that go on there, and they have one way of going, and it says up. Get these nuts started. I just want to snug these base bolts in. All right, those are snugged in. So I'm going to come back here in a little bit and we'll torque these in. Now I've got a couple little tools that I've made up here. I've got one, I punched a hole in it and then squared it up, and it fits on these nuts for torquing them down. And I made another one. I just took a socket and took a 9/16 wrench, basically did the same thing. So I could get on there for torquing these style nuts on here. So we should torque these to between 32 and 40 pounds. So what I'm going to start off with is a 20-pound set. So one thing I also like to do when I'm doing these is I want to make sure that that wrench is at the same angle. So that gives me the same torque ratio. And we're going to do a crisscross pattern here. Now you can buy one of these little wrenches, but if you're anything like me, if I can make it, I'll just make it. All right, we'll just let those sit for a while, and then we'll come back and do some more torquing. I like to do it in like either 2 or 3 stages when I'm doing the torque of any of the bolts or nuts. All right, we're going to do another torque. I'm going to take it to 30 pounds. And we'll do our torque. Now I'll also put up a pattern of the way you should torque these. All right, we'll let that sit, and then I will come back and then do the final torque on that. All right, I'm going to do the final torque. And I am torquing to 40 pounds. Alrighty. And you want to make sure you never leave your torque gauge on set on anything. You want to back it all the way off. It makes it last longer. We'll come back and we'll install the heads. When you're doing these head gaskets, you want to make sure that you've got them all lined up properly. And it matches up with all the holes on top. Now I put a little bit of never seize on these head bolts so that if later on if I need to pull them out, then it's a little easier for me to do that. Okay, got it started. Grab another bolt, put a little bit of never seize on there. And you just continue around with the bolts and get these all in place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and finish up putting the bolts in, and then we'll come back and I'll show you the torque down series. Now that we have the head bolts in place, I don't tighten them down or snug them down. I leave everything loose. One of the reasons for that is I wanted to fit the manifold to make sure that it fits properly in there. This, on both sides of the flanges, have an equal distance all the way around. And that's just by moving the heads a little bit. You don't have to move them tremendously just to make sure that everything fits. So they're kind of right there is where this one needs to be. So that when you line up on these, is that on this style, uses a rubber band to fit on the manifold and on the head manifold. But the earlier models used an O-ring. So it's very important to make sure that you get this all lined up. It had a cutaway on both sides, on the heads and on the manifold, and then this rubber band or O-ring would fit on there, which could be a real pain to get on. A lot of us changed over and went to the rubber band, even on the older models. But you wanted to make sure that that fit in there equally. The gap was right on. So now that we've got it at this stage here, we can go around and snug up on the bolts. And I'm just gonna run it down lightly. This little wrench I made up actually works the best for doing this. That would be the first stage of tightening down these head bolts, is to snug them up first. And this also helps hold the heads in place after fitting your manifold. So these are snug down. So we're gonna torque this now to 30 pounds. We're going to do this in stages. We need to go up to 65 pounds, but right now we're going to torque to 30 pounds. So this is number one, and then we're going to go across to number two, and I'll put up a tightening pattern on. We'll be popping up here soon. We're going to go to number three, number four, number five, torque down. So now we're going to let this all kind of sit, and then I'll come back and I'll do the final torque. Let's do the final torque on it. It's been about 15 minutes. I'm going to run this up to 65 pounds. We're going to start with number one here. Okay, so what I've got in place here, I ended up putting the push rods in, and you have these little gaskets that you want to make sure you get the bottom ones in and the top ones in, up in there. You want to make sure you put a little lubricant on the top of these and in the base area. So when you're putting these push rods, they all kind of just slide together. Now what I've done here is I've used some clothespins that I've picked up. I don't know exactly where, but they work quite well for holding the pushrod tubes up out of the way. And then it just makes it easier for when you're adjusting. Now these are old stock Harley setups, so it's a 4-turn. Okay, let me try to explain this without confusing myself. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get these two push rods, before we adjust here, that they are pretty equal on the stroke. this one's going down, this one's coming up, or this one, you know, you're sitting right in there. So it would be in between the front lobe and this lobe that we're riding. What we're trying to adjust is the back here where we're on the flat of the cam. So what I've done is that you can see this is coming up, that one's coming up. So we're kind of right in the middle there to adjust these back ones. Okay, so what I've done is I've marked a spot here on the lifter block itself. And now I'm going to mark that blade right there. And I'll mark right here and that blade. So we know that these, what you want to do is you want to run these down till they're snug. And then you're going to hold the push rod tube and you're going to make 4 turns. So this one's going to go 4 times around. So that's 1 turn. That's 2 turns. That's 3 turns. And the 4th turn is coming up. So now what you want to do is you want to lock that off. And you're holding both of those flats. You're holding the flat on the push rod tube and the adjusting flat. This is the tightening. So you want to get that good and snug in there. So yeah, you need 3 wrenches. So let's go ahead and do this other one over here. So once again, we're going to run that down to where it is down snug against the lifter block itself. And we'll go ahead and mark this here. Mark that flat so you can count it as it goes around. Whoa. So that's 1, that's 2, that's 3, and that's 4 times around. So now we want to snug off the locking nut. For now, we're going to let these sit because they have to bleed down. Yeah, even if the motor is sat for a while, you still want to make sure that these bleed down. So they get to a certain point when you're able to grab these and turn, then they've bled down. But right now, you got to wait. And it usually takes about 15 minutes. So don't get in a hurry. Okay, I've got these. These turn now. So we're going to rotate this over. These lifters are right in sync. They're rocking back and forth. So these are wide open here. So we can adjust these. So let's run them down till they're snug. Let me get my marking and that one. So once again, we're going to do 4 turns. So we're going to turn these 4 turns. So that's 1, 2, 3, and going for number 4 here. 4. So we're going to lock these off. So I have to hold both of these wrenches. Snugged. And now we'll move on to, this would be the exhaust. So here again, 4 turns around. So we're going for number 1. Coming up. 1. Number 2, number 3, and coming around for number 4. Number 4. Gonna hold these guys in place here. All right. So there we go. Now we'll let these sit and check them to make sure they turn. And then the push rod tubes can be put down into place. Okay, I can rotate these suckers now. So let's remove our clips. The difficulty of this is I'm not in the right position I want to be in because I'm filming. So I can't, it's a little awkward for me right at the moment, but push these on. And then there's a little something we need to do after we get this all clipped in. On these over here, what they tend to do on the they end up hooking onto the fin. So you got to rock this cap out a little bit. But one thing you want to do as soon as you get them on there is you want to rock these things so that you get a good seat in that O-ring. Saves a lot of headaches down the line. So we're at this stage now. We could basically put the engine in the frame. So let's get to it. Now, a lot of you might be wondering how I get my bikes off of this table onto that table. Well, I have this nice rolling chain fall up here. So I can move this bike any which way that I want to go. And I can knock stuff off. But that's how I basically do it. We're moving from one table to another. I can also weigh the bikes. Of course, I've got the pressure off on this one, but I have a scale up there that I can weigh the bikes so we get a basic idea of how much the bike weighs altogether. But just in case you're wondering, that's how I get them on the table. Why I'm not using this table to put the motor in is because I need that table for tomorrow, because I have a bike coming in. I have to do some exhaust work. So anyway, I'm going to get back, lock this down on the table, and then maybe we'll insert the motor. So I've got this little unit for putting, we're going to use the lift to set the motor in, and I use my wife's garden cart to move my engine around. Every once in a while I steal it. Well, let's see if we can get this motor set in there. In case you were wondering what a Harley motor weighs, it weighs about 140 pounds. All right, we got the motor in. This is the setup I use. It's just a big heavy bent bar that I welded a piece on that would capture the top motor mount and hooked onto my lift. Now, back in the day, I used to lift those motors up and put them in without one of those. But since since the accident that I had last year, my upper body isn't as strong. So work smart, not stupid. So makes it a hell of a lot easier lifting 140 pounds to fight it into a frame. A lot easier. So anyway, I'm going to get to laying stuff out. So I have a few things that I need to do to this before I mount it in. I want to remake this bracket. This is for my left-hand side. It was up high, and I'd kind of like to have that foot mount for the mid area a little lower, and same on this transmission side. So there's a bit of modifications I have to do to this right now. It's pretty boring stuff. I'll get it to another certain stage. I'll show you what I've done and how I fitted everything. So right now, I'm going to get back to finish bolting this thing up and getting everything kind of lined up. Well, we've come to the end of this episode of part 3, this old Shovelhead. And if there's any comments or questions, put them in my comment section below, or send them to my email address at tmiyagi@hotmail.com. And if you've liked this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget that ringy-dingy button for the next episode coming up. So this is Mr. Miyagi saying, be safe out there. See you on the road. Ciao.